Welcome to a very special episode of Office Hours. This is episode number 26, and today I'm being joined by a familiar face. Familiar to you, I hope. It's Andrew. Hi, Andrew.
Hello. Thanks for seeing me this morning.
No problem. Thanks for making an appointment. You're looking dapper.
Well, when one is attending class,
Sorry, when in Rome, I guess burn stuff down and play fiddles. So, if for audience folks, if you're attending office hours for the very first time, what we do here on the office hours is normally I get questions from the audience. I get three questions a week, and you record your voice, and I read your questions, and we go through them, and I try to answer them as best I can. They tend to be gaming questions, predominantly around game mastering or game design, hacking games, that sort of thing, and Andrew and I have been trying to make time for a question that they had for me for a little while, and then they suggested, "Hey, why don't we just office hours that shit?"
so here we are.
So here we are. So what do you want to talk about today,
Well,
Andrew?
let's not break the format too much, so I'll ask my question
All
and
right,
then we can talk about it.
sure.
So, hi Adam. I'm Andrew, also known as Commuting Crow on Twitter, and I've started designing a game, but I've run into some problems. So despite having some pretty strong design goals and a sense of what I want to create, I don't have like an armature or like a roadmap of how to get from these, rough and unfinished ideas to a final product. I can imagine what I want play to look like, but I'm not sure how to design my way there. And it's really hard to find resources that are specific about actual design process. A lot of people talk about finished products, but very little of the in between is really exposed. So I was hoping you might help me out with that, being that my game is a hack of these games,
Mm-hmm.
and that you are familiar with that kind of stuff.
I
So
have I have been down that road myself. Um, Yeah, I think you're right. Like I think that there isn't a lot of advice or even like you said armature. I like that the idea of a framework around to even begin thinking about this stuff. Like often we get the two kinds of extremes that are like I don't know, we just made a game. It happened and now there's a game and you could I don't know, do the same stuff as me, but whatever that was, I can't remember.
I had to figure it out on my own, and
Yeah.
why don't you do the same? Yeah.
And to be fair, there is a I think there is a degree of that. There's a degree of like doing the design makes you aware of how the design can be done. But even doing the design, what does that look like, right? Like designing stuff. Um, and then on the flip side, we often run into this situation where, especially now and more, maybe less in tabletop, but very much in video game design, there are educational schools of thought that are being built around them. You can go to a video game design course at like, most higher education facilities, I think, these days in North America. And those are worthless in their own way as well. So,
Like I've worked in the games industry, and I have some familiarity, quite a bit of familiarity, because I work closely with designers. Um, I know how that kind of stuff goes down, and like half the time they don't know what the fuck they're doing either. So, I'm not
yeah,
going to expect a flawless roadmap or whatever. But,
exactly. Yeah.
whatever your personal
Well, and
insights
I
are.
think I think that's much more valuable and certainly more accessible to all of us as sort of small time, in so much as there is such a thing anymore in tabletop role playing games. Non Wizards of the Coast employees
Right?
who want to make games. Um, I think the thing is that it's tricky because in indie games we see things like Dogs in the Vineyard or Apocalypse World or games that were not made by Vincent Baker. And we see these like kind of perfect little, seemingly on the outside, perfect little like nuggets of game, right? Where it's like, this game does one thing. It does the Apocalypse World thing. And like, you just got to figure out your thing and then come up with some brilliant mechanics and then write the game in such a way that everyone will understand them perfectly. And then good work. You did it. You'll probably win in any. Um, but Yeah, I think sharing personal like specific experiences about this stuff is a great place to start, and then also like answering specific questions because I think that's a thing that the dialectic doesn't happen very often, right? The synthesis is harder to do. Like it's easy to write a blog about game design to be like, I did this to make these things happen, but being able to interrogate that to be like, yeah, but why did it happen that way, right? So I mean, I think you're in a place, obviously, like you said, that I can offer some guidance around. Like, you're making a hack of an existing game. Can we see your copy of Apocalypse World again? By the way,
My
your
well-loved copy of
brutalized
Apocalypse
copy
World.
of Apocalypse World. Well, at
Yeah,
least
it's
the
held
pages
together
are
with
all
tape. It's got like hella bookmarks and stuff in it.
the
Yeah.
pages are all in mine. Mine has this like ivory sort of triangle in the middle of the pages from flipping
Yeah, too much flipping.
over like seemingly 1,000 years. Um, So yeah, I mean, hacking an existing game requires two things, and this is why I think hacking is, in a way, as a design experience, more valuable than building from scratch, because hacking first requires that you understand on some primitive level, some deep subconscious level, the thing that you're trying to hack, right? You've not just decided, feh, Dungeons and Dragons, I can do better than you, Gary. You've actually like embodied the thing. You've played the game so much you could do it in your sleep. You've absorbed every piece of it and understand why it works the way that it works. And I think that's huge. I think understanding games, even just one game, is really crucial to being able to make new things.
Mhm.
And I think in part too, the like thievery is a huge part of design, and like whether we do it on purpose or not, we're inspired by the games that we play, and their content informs what we do. So all that stuff is going to affect the final result of the game that you're making. So I guess why don't we talk a little bit about what your intentions are? Like talk about the kind of game you would like it to be.
So I've got my notes all on hand here. So what I want to make is a a game which is kind of like it's more of a hack of Monster Hearts than a hack of Apocalypse World ultimately.
Mhm.
But I want to make a game for doing like magical girl anime.
Mhm.
I want to make a game you could play Steven Universe in.
Sure. Yeah.
And to me, what that means is a game where, so in Monster Hearts, we have strings, which are like social connection as like power to control and like fuck with the other players.
Mm.
I want to do a game where social connection is very important, but that it empowers you. That's like how you fight, is that you have to have good friendships, right? Because that's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Source
Yeah.
material is like the power of friendship overcomes these other things. And so I saw that kind of notion as something that I could, shoehorn into doing this thing from my source material. So that's one of my big design goals, is having like friendship equal badass fighting power. I also want the game to be more structured because I have a lot of opinions about how bad story game players are at pacing and doing like big picture structuring of their game.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like me throwing my opinion out in design form. Or as Vincent Baker would say, doing this.
Right.
And so I want a game that enforces a certain kind of pacing. And this idea was born of me watching your entire Persona 4 playthrough and being
Mm-hmm.
like, it's really cool how they structure that game. And it's really cool how you're adolescent characters who aren't in control of their time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of bring some of that into this game. Um,
Excellent.
and
Yeah.
also like social links from Persona 4 are another great example. Like you should be able to play Persona in this game as well.
I mean I can hear the teeming hordes of the internet. I can hear their drool dripping from their hungry jaws. Take a
So
take a
those are
moment, internet. Wipe your face. We're gonna talk about how to make this game into a reality.
so like goal one, social connection as power to do cool stuff. Goal two, structure and pacing in like this control of the game instead of the players. And then my big third design goal is to have the game have some like queer themes, etc., and really drive home the idea of like how suffocating and oppressive society is. Because like from a lot of like Sailor Moon episodes and stuff, there are so many characters, and this is also great for just like teen fiction or young adult fiction in general. There are characters who are struggling with who they are and can't accept who they are or aren't being accepted for who they are. And this is also a theme that's close to my heart. And so I wanted to make a game that shows what that's like for people by way of its mechanics.
Yeah. Well, and that's
Like
I
the
think that's
legends
the thing.
and stuff like that.
Everything in a game, everything a designer has to say about games or society or anything, everything that we have to say in these games is communicated through the mechanisms of the game, right? Like we'll get the opportunity to polish our ideas with art and with layout and with like the designing stuff, but that's at the end, right? The flavor text that we include in the game, the way we write it, that's all the end. So the mechanics really are what convey that stuff. And so when you want the players to feel that constraint as a metaphor, you find ways to constrain the characters mechanically. So thinking about, I guess that's the first place to sort of separate, right? Is like you have this philosophy for the game, because the way you were describing there's several sort of stages. There's places where you're kind of ahead of the beginning stages, and there's places that we're right at the beginning, and I think that's normal. I think we start to, and as I talk about design and stuff, I think it's not all one straightforward process. You're going to have a place you start from, and you kind of shoot little comets out into the darkness in one direction,
Yeah,
and then you'll head off in another, and you're building out this kind of vast rainbow of ideas that'll be finished eventually. But it's not like you go stage one, design this, stage two, design this. Sometimes, like Vincent was saying in an interview once, that the first thing that he ever designed for Apocalypse World was the Angel playbook. That's where that game started. It was that character type, and then everything filled in around there. So like that'll happen by accident. You'll find the thing that you design first just is the thing that gets finished first. I know where I like to start when I think about the idea of building new games. Like I tend to start with how those games are GM'd. I tend to think about that, about the structural
because
stuff.
you're very much the GM guy, right?
Yeah, yeah, because the GM has, I think, in most games the least player constraint, and so is the hardest thing to design around, right? Because in most games the GM isn't told how to play or what to do. The GM is just
Yeah.
told, here are the rules, do with them as thou
Make
wilt.
shit up.
Yeah, just make some
Make it
shit up.
fun. Make it fun for your players.
Exactly.
Yeah, Adam, how can I make this game fun?
So I think you have both the challenge and the advantage of source material, right? Like in the same way that Dungeon World did, we and this happened to me throughout the whole process. I read every edition of Dungeons and Dragons several times, right? Picking apart the things that made them all feel similar to me, looking at thematic stuff, being like, okay, so there's this kind of monster, but only in like 2 of the 19 versions of D&D. So is it important to D&D? Is it a thing? What
They're
mechanics
like
matter?
fundamental, right?
Yeah, what stuff? So I guess that's the thing, is like you obviously have a familiarity with like Sailor Moon and Steven Universe and Persona, some of your core kind of inspirations for the kinds of fiction that will come out of the game, because that's what you have on either end, right? You have Steven Universe on one end, and you have your player's narrative and the stories they remember telling at the table on the other end, and you need to get from one to the other, from
Yeah.
inspiration to thing, and that's mechanisms, right? So you talked a little bit about that, about what the kinds of things that the game, how the game will be about those things. But I feel like I mention this constantly. I feel like I talk about these precepts before, and I don't know. I'm sure I've mentioned them to you. Are you familiar with Jared's 3 questions? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's worth revisiting them because it's like, what is your game about?
Yeah.
How is your game about that thing? And then I can't remember the third one.
How do you reward players for doing the thing, basically?
Right.
Because a game can be about something mechanically, but if you don't dangle the carrot or threaten with the stick,
Yeah,
players
there's
will
no
not
reason
engage.
to it.
Yeah, like if D&D didn't give you experience points for anything ever, or you didn't get gold, there would be no reason to break that verisimilitude of why are we fighting this monster, and players
Yep.
would just be like, I set my sword down and flee, like I'm done.
Yeah, there's no point in continuing.
So what your game is about is often the at least for me, because I'm sure some people don't design this way, is often the first thing that you can fully get your head around, and it will change because you'll create mechanics that you'll be like, this is interesting, and is making the game could make the game about a different thing, and you can go back and tweak that.
This is interesting and doesn't apply.
Yeah. Well, and I think some designers start in that place. Some designers make mechanics and they're like, what kind of game would this create if we
Yeah.
played like this, right? This is where you get games where it's like not about a particular thing in concept, but they're like, well, I want to do a game that has like, you roll 14 d20s and those are the results you use for the whole rest of the session. And you like, what would that work? And what is this mechanically saying about the world? So it sounds like the kinds of things that your game is about from the player side is your connections with the other characters, and how those connections aren't just your like metaphorical like feelsy stuff about them. They're not just like this is how well I know this person. They're literally like this is how well we can operate because it sounds to me a bit like Hex on Overdrive or Bonds on Overdrive, where it's like
Yeah, absolutely.
super
But I kind
relevant.
of so I want to view them as expendable though as well. So in the way that strings are expendable, I think that's a really interesting way to do it. So that these relationships are a resource that waxes and wanes. So you build it up and then you use it up to do stuff, and then you need to go and keep doing it.
Right. And so is that like, I guess we're looking at it not in a, when you say that, I think about like Stardew Valley and I think about Persona in the sense of like, cool, I've hit level 10 with you and no need to speak with
I
you
want to
ever
avoid that
again.
trap,
Yeah,
right? Like, oh yeah,
exactly.
we're already the best, so now we just do everything together all the time, and we get huge rolls, and it's fine. No, it's like that gets
So
spent, right?
fictionally, would it feel like what would that feel like expending that energy? Say you get into a fight with your friends and you expend like all of your social links with them and you're back at zero. What should the character be like after that happens?
Powerless.
Yeah.
So, in the way that like Monster Hearts has a darkest self, I would love to have the inverse of that, where it's like you don't get to transform because, like,
Right. You're
obviously the characters have to transform. Oh my god, or like activate their whatever, you know. So like you need to the power of friendship to do that. So
sure.
without it, you're just some mook. You're just a person.
Now,
But or
in the inspiring fiction, just sort of two things that jump to mind. Generally, the sailor senshi all transform together at once, right? It's not often. Sorry, Sailor Mercury, you didn't hang out at the video arcade with us today. You don't get to use your magic powers. We're gonna go fight. But then on the flip side, there are characters like Steven
yeah, exactly.
who
Steven
are
is the perfect
not
example of this.
capable of these things.
He only gets his big shield when his friends are about to be, murdered. And then he's like, suddenly he has this power because of that bond that he has with them, right?
Sure. So would you say how do we replicate that kind of stuff without going too much detail wise into mechanisms? What do you anticipate that sort of thing playing like? Are you waiting for a fictional trigger from the GM to be allowed to transform, like Steven's protect your friends trigger, or can you bypass that stuff by spending this friendship currency we've talked about?
So I imagine certain playbooks might have a move like that one for Steven, where they are more about being really powerless and more about being reactionary.
Hmm.
But that, like, broad strokes, like the kind of core mechanic around it,
Yeah.
would be something more like you have to actively go work on a relationship with someone. So it would be more akin to like the choice in Persona to go and like hang out with Kanji
Hmm.
all the time because you love Kanji. But anyways, you go hang out with Kanji, and then you can like get power from that. And so we get to like see and describe and experience this moment between you and Kanji. And because I want it to be like, I want those friendships to exist within the fiction,
Yeah.
like that I have to go and like actually be nice to Kanji or actually say something or do something with him.
Sure.
And that then I'm like, cool, I've got like my social link with Kanji is at 4 now. Or at least I have 4 points in there that I can expend. Because we went to the video arcade and got in a fight with some bros,
Right.
but I like talked him down or I stood up for him or whatever, right?
Hmm. So what's the like bare minimum amount of stuff that you could see yourself needing to be able to play? Because that's sort of the first milestone, right? Is getting to that first test of the game. In this case, it might be because there's multiple characters. You're going to need at least sort of two players, right?
Hmm.
And they're going to need to have the ability to interact in some way mechanically. So you want to test that system. Um, how integral do you see the pacing stuff you talked about as being in the moment to moment, like in an individual session versus like as a campaign sort of thing? Like, could you play test without it?
I think it's core to the game,
Mm-hmm.
because it is what is going to help deliver stuff like the overbearing pressure of society or whatever else. Because it's about forcing people to make choices about what they do with their one bit of free time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I envision it kind of maybe working like how in Mouse Guard there's like a player turn and a or in Torchbearer or whatever else,
Yeah.
right? So like when you're most of the time it's the GM turn and they're just like putting you in the pressure cooker, and then you get this one little moment where you can go and like
Right.
gather
Your
these important
weekend or
resources.
your day off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Um,
Children's Day. I don't have to go to school, so I have three actions this turn.
yeah, exactly. Right. So like that tension is important because without it, I can just go hang out with my friends all the time. Like we can just
Well, then you
friends
get
are always hanging out.
I guess the difference, like if you compare and contrast, and this is very much without getting too cultural analysis about it. I mean, Persona is a very Japanese game, and it's compare and contrast on the North American side, shit like Buffy or whatever. Like Buffy's
Mhm.
just fucking hanging out all the
Like she skips
time.
class all the
Yeah,
time.
she's just never. They're never actually required to be in class. There's no like, sorry, can't save the world today. Like they complain about it sometimes, but it doesn't come up.
Yeah, like within the narrative, it doesn't have that the
Yeah,
power. It
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
You don't express it within that story, which is why like Buffy doesn't fit in my whole paradigm.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and so and whether that be going to school or whatever, like whatever conceit it is for your game, although most commonly it would be that you are in high school.
Hmm.
Um, that pressure to me feels very essential for like a variety of the things, including all the like queer content, including all of the like decision pressure and all that kind of stuff. So
Right. Okay. So that kind of, I guess that kind of like framing builds into the economy of how much time you have to build your links and you build your links to. So let's think about the cycle. So I guess the idea is that you deal with the stuff that the GM is aggressively sort of scene framing you into, being like you have to deal with this.
mhm.
So deal with that, and that's one thing. And then you have your own stuff that you can do. Now, do the two have any effect? Like, can you buy additional time for yourself during the kind of like the check stuff? Like, how do you determine the balance between those two? Does that come from the playbook? Does it come from some kind of economy between the GM and the player, like destiny points or fate points? Like, how do you determine what percentage of the game is each of those things?
So here's kind of what I was thinking is that you're going to be making rolls during the GM turn, to like resist the crap that the GM is throwing at you. And if you I feel like good rolls there can maybe net you some of the benefits that you get kind of for free on your turn.
Hmm.
You can like eke out a little bit more during the
Right,
GM
passing
turn
passing
to
notes in class.
on your roll, or like if you can like play it out a certain way. Because like you can be like caught in shit together, and that can go really well and make you two bond, or it can go really poorly and drive you apart. um and that like essentially, um it's not so much about you needing to undermine yourself the way you would in like Torchbearer or something.
Sure.
I want it to be more about like when things go, like if you are able to succeed, or if you're playing the game well, we're going to reward you by giving you some of that for free.
Hmm.
Because I think it's going to be punishing enough without,
Right. I mean, yeah, being a teenager and dying alone in a horrible dungeon are pretty much the same thing. So,
you know.
yeah.
Um, and so like I imagine that every character is going to have like hit points of some kind, and those are going to get attacked here during the GM, like the initial GM turns where you're just like dealing with society's pressure. That's the stick that the GM has. Just be like, yeah, it went badly for you. You're going to take stress or whatever we're going to call it. And you're trying to avoid that because later on when you're fighting the
Yeah.
thing, when you like finally, find it or whatever, confront it, you want to come out with as many resources as possible, kind of in the like darkest dungeon.
So
kind
the
of like
three kinds
how
of
it's
the
heavily
three sort of three
boss.
phases, the triforce of this game sound like the the sort of school obligation square world thing,
Hmm.
the making connections with the people you care about part, the sort of more intimate building that stuff, and those two can affect the third thing, which is the magical girl monster fighting saving the world
Yeah.
part. Right. Okay. Um,
Like going into the TV world phase.
yeah. Totally. The TV world phase. Cool. Okay. So in terms of like absorbing more things, more inspiration, have you gotten a chance to play Blades in the Dark?
No, I
Okay.
wish.
Yeah. So if you, I assume you've read it. If you haven't read it, read it. If you get a chance, watch it in action. There's some good actual plays. Um,
Yeah, I
but
started watching your actual play of it with
mhm,
John Harper and Strash and that other person whose name I can't remember.
Sean.
But then I got sidetracked.
Yeah, I mean it's a
I
lot.
should
There's
go
a lot
back
of
to it.
stuff. It's hard to watch. Kind of like I want to just see all the mechanical stuff in action. Most
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
watch
Can we
these
spend
shows because they're
all
like, I want to see
time
the
10
characters do the
times?
funny character stuff. But we're like, no, just get to the part where you do the rules. Do the rule thing. So I mean there's a new one starting on roleplay this week, and then Eric has his It's Always Sunny in Duskfall show. So
Hmm.
there's some options out there, but basically there is a turn back and forth in that game where the players can go on missions and do things. Then they come back and they have to deal with the ramifications, which is to say heat from the cops, dealing with their own vice, which is how they recover stress,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. So there is that.
It has a bit of that too,
That's a
right?
thing in games, right? Mouse guard, torchbearer, this, any sort of like intentionally phased game. And I do like the idea of three individual phases affecting each other. I think that's taking it to a place we haven't seen before. But it is also going to be a bigger challenge, obviously, trying to create the three systems that interlink. But that's okay. So I guess maybe that's the flow that maybe you want to start with, because everything else, like the kinds of things the players do, uh, the kinds of things that the GM will be doing, the moves the GM will be making, that sort of thing, all of that will flow out of this. I can't stop thinking of it as like the Triforce, like.
Yeah, but that's great, right? We have
I'm thinking of the big neon triangle from Neon Demon, but maybe less horrifying. Yeah, like there's three distinct things that affect each other in two different ways, rather than, because I think with player turn, GM turn, we're looking at a tennis match, we're looking at ping pong, right? But in this, there's a circular flow, or the flow might not be, right? Like, do you?
Mhm.
Okay, so here's a question: chronologically in play at the table, do you go A B C, or do you go A B A B until C is inevitable?
Yeah, exactly. So there's like some back and forth, like because let's go
Like
like we're looking at Persona,
like
right? There's like
Persona.
this long investigation phase, and then we have that big payoff at the end of actually getting to go into the dungeon and fighting the monsters. But there's a whole bunch of buildup that we want to do along the way. Um,
Right. There's a
so
tension. There's a tension between doing A and B, like doing A grudgingly, so you're allowed to do B, forced to do A again, but you know C is coming, and you're like, shit, we got to
yeah,
do as much B as possible
so
before C
I'm
gets
totally
here.
willing to give C triggers that either the players or the MC can like bring it. If the players are like stalling too much, then the monsters come to get you,
Sure.
um,
Yeah. No. I mean,
which
that's
happens
again,
sometimes in the source material
it's
as well.
precisely the Persona effect, right? Where
Yeah.
you have X amount of days and you get warning, right? It's like, oh, here comes the rain, and then it's foggy Inaba, and now you got to deal with dungeon time.
Yeah.
Um, but also you can sort of push into that on your own if you're like, no, we're ready now.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so I guess for that stuff, structurally, it makes sense to it makes sense to build to build that into the pacing of the game, not even from like a GM perspective or from the player perspective, but just mechanically to say
Yeah, exactly.
this is the way the game goes,
The
and
pacing is
maybe
mechanical.
yeah, and maybe you can pick like is this a short, long, or medium like build up time, but you can't change it once you've locked it in. Kind of
Yeah.
like the dragons in Ryotama. You can switch them between adventures, but when you pick one, that's the mechanics we're going to use
Yeah,
for
that's where
this.
you're at. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Cool. So I think actually it's interesting having this conversation. You're seeing why generalized praxis for role playing game creation doesn't really exist
Because they're all very specific.
because yeah, they're very specific. You know, we're trying. I think I'm trying to look at it from a framework perspective, but it's very difficult because you fall through the cracks in the lattice very quickly and try to fill in from the inside. So I guess to try to take a step back from it, the idea here is like looking at what you want to accomplish in terms of, for me, ultimately, what kind of fiction the game is going to create. When you are done a game, when you're finished a game, it's almost more important to me as a designer. I think that the people's experience after the game is more interesting than during the game, because it's like, okay, what was the game you just played? Tell me the story of the narrative you just experienced. Why was it like that? What kinds of shit in the game made it that way versus what were you just making up yourself?
Hmm.
Because I think that you can make a game that's like, we're gonna play GURPS, but it's Magical Girl GURPS, and people can bring the magical girl, right? They can be super invested in the setting and they can do all that pacing shit themselves.
Yeah, we need to make sure that the mechanics are actually there doing their job,
Exactly, but that's lazy and it's
doing the
cheating. And
jobs they need to do.
we're not actually designing a game if we do that.
Yeah.
So understanding that flow and knowing what kind of fiction is going to emerge from your game, I think is the like absolute very first place to start. And then finding threads to mechanize to create that system around your idea to make it replicable. And I think that yeah, designing just enough to playtest, designing just enough to answer the questions that you come up with in the first phase, because so much of early game design is I wonder if, like,
Yeah.
what if this happened, or how could I do this, or if I do it this way, what would that be like? And so all you're doing when you're building your first playtest is saying, can I answer those questions with the material that I have? So I guess thinking of the questions first is a good place to start, right? Like,
Yeah, like I did something that my friend Daniel, well, you know Daniel, but my friend Daniel
yeah,
has designed some games. Like he did My Daughter, the Queen of France, which is a cool thing. He was like, what you should do, Andrew, is write a fake actual play for your game.
hmm
And so I went through that exercise, and that was very revealing because it was like, yeah, like what are people actually going to be doing?
right, yeah. What would it
Just
actually
imagine
look
someone
like?
playing your game, and what does that look like, and then try to like see your game in it. Um, so I went through that, and that was kind of neat to just be like, yeah, it's like a maybe they do this, maybe they roll this, and then that happens. So I got to like I did a little like fake GM turn
hmm
basically in there. Um, but yeah, like figuring out what the actual bare minimum needed to play is because I think I heard John Harper say this where it's like most of the design happens like by playing the game.
Yeah, because this is the thing. You'll have some ideas of what the bare minimum is, and then you're gonna play with a group, and they're gonna be like, "How do I do this?" And you're gonna be like, "I don't know. It's just not on. It wasn't on my list.
You
What?
don't.
What?
It's not in the rules.
Yeah, you don't. Why do you? Okay. Make a note to design that. Bullshit your way
So
through it for now.
so yeah, let's talk about like what from the sounds of it I'm going to be needing. So to
Yeah.
me, it sounds like I need to make some kind of decision about that pacing model
Yeah.
and put that into mechanics. So it being
Sure.
even if it's just like for every like
Well,
game turn, there's a
boil
player turn.
boil it
Full
down, right?
stop. That could be fine, but
Think of it like in terms of a sort of chronology. So if your game, and I don't mean this in fictional like in universe time, but like if your game were your whole campaign is a year, what does a month look like? What does a day look like? Or what does a week look like? What does a day look like? What does an hour, a minute, and a second, right? the core thing, like if you again use Torchbearer as an example, Torchbearer is second. The second hand that clicks around the clock of Torchbearer is a single roll of the dice.
Yeah.
Right?
And that advances the grind.
That's the first thing that lets you know time has passed. Right? And a series of dice rolls together until you make camp constitute the hour of gameplay. Right? So when you're thinking about pacing in the game, what's your atomic particle? Right? What's
what's the
your
smallest unit?
I mean, even then, there's smaller units than the atom, but whatever. We're not in a science show. What's the smallest building block you're going to be working with, and build up from there? Because that's how you know time is passing, right? Because if you look at like the GM phase, you look at the school phase or whatever you want to call it, the not social link part and the not fighting the monster part. If you look at that, how do you know when it's over? Right? How do you know how much stuff to put in there? Is it one for each player? Do the players interact? If so, does that count as two things? What's the mechanical click that sets you from one thing to another until that hour of play is done?
Yeah, particularly because we want to, like, part of my design goal is to be like, no, you don't know how to pace your game. This is how you pace your game.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I need to, be very clear and explicit. And I think working with the idea of like scenes as our like unit of how we know when to move on to the next thing, probably good.
Well, and if you're looking to make your game didactic about pacing, scenes are a place where I think a lot of GMs could use some concrete guidance, because I think
like
that
what a scene is. So we have to talk about what a scene actually.
Yeah. Because I think that, as much as Apocalypse World taught GMs that it's okay to have rules, right? In that you can play this game, and even if you're resisting making moves, you are making them, and these are the best ones to make. I think Apocalypse World does next to nothing about being like, okay, this is a Vincent thing. Vincent doesn't do this in his games, really.
I watched a talk between him and John Harper, and they were like, and Vincent was just like, I don't even believe that scenes exist. So this does not surprise me.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you don't have to make this stand as a designer generally, but this game can be a form of taking a stand in that, like, scenes matter in this game because they're interesting to you.
What a scene is.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's important to look at that, and important to look at the kinds of things that you can use mechanically to enforce that. And again, I think that the passage of time in game and the passage of time out of it is obviously going to be very different. So, do you imagine the going to school turn to be mechanically complex or simple? Is it like you have to take a math test, roll to take a math test is done, move on to the next thing?
Well, here, let's see. I have it's actually really handy. I have written
notes are good.
I have it. I wrote out what this turn is going to be like. And so it's like the framing is like, okay, it's Friday afternoon. You're all in your last class of the day, history. Professor Kojima is giving a lecture on the suffragettes. And partway through, he like awkwardly calls on someone, but doesn't ask a question. He just is like, basically like, hey, everything is great with gender now, right? And then that player has to like react, has to respond. And so he talks to Chie in this example, and Chie's player is like, well, that's a stupid thing for him to say. And so the MC's like, well, do you call him on it? It's obvious that everyone else in class is agreeing with him. You see people nodding. This is all fine. And she's like, I totally call him out. Okay, so that's breaking from convention. Roll plus your courage. And so she does that. She gets an 8. And so the MC's like, great. So what does that look like? And the player says, okay. So Chie stands up and talks about how structural misogyny is a thing still, and like the wage gap, and about the struggles of her single mother. And so she's like, cool, I'm choosing the option where I'm vulnerable. I haven't fleshed out the move at all, but I'm just like, maybe there's
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the thing in terms of figuring out pacing. It's okay to just be like, there is a mechanic here. It does a thing. Sure.
And so the MC's like, cool, you take some stress. While this is going on, the other two players at the table get a thing.
So during this phase, just to kind of interrogate your thought pattern on it, during the obligations phase, during the obligatory part of the game, is it meant primarily as a design thing and as a fictional thing? Is it meant predominantly to wear the characters down so that they are in a worse position when they fight monsters?
Yes, absolutely. It's where stress is doled out. It's very much like Torchbearer in that way.
So in this case, the players will be encouraged to, I guess, is there an opportunity to take a risk to gain some kind of additional like benefit during this phase?
So I feel like anytime they get the like 10 plus result,
Hmm.
they will absolutely get some kind of benefit. So they're not being encouraged to avoid rolling, but every time they roll, there is the risk that they suffer things, that they take some kind of
Right.
damage.
Okay. Because I think the thing in this phase, then, if your intention is to sort of pummel the players with things, it means that they don't have the. In that case, the one you were describing, would Chie's player have been able to not respond? Right. Like,
There's a
it
different move if you don't respond.
right. Okay. There you go. So mechanically, and again, was that the GM choosing Chie as a target for that thing, being like, in which case, is the amount of time in this phase indicated by the number of times that happens to each person?
I think, yeah, I think that would make the most sense is to say like to do it similarly to Torchbearer, where it's like every however many rolls, like that's it. The scene has to wrap up.
Okay.
Um, I think um, whether or not it's targeting specific people is not super relevant because okay, like Chie gets called out, but maybe someone else, one of the other players, stands up and talks
Right.
and like
Sure.
challenges the authority figure or whatever.
Okay.
But just that the MC pushes on that, and that's part of their principles is to um, be that suffocating pressure of society, which means like, oh well, so and so is female or so and so is like a trans character or whatever. So like, let's shit all over them for that.
Yeah.
Or
Totally.
so and so is a man, like Kanji's a man. Let's him make him feel
Make
really
him do man
uncomfortable.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because people think he's gay or something, right? Like
Yeah.
wherever they're, get your bloody fingerprints on everything.
Right. Yeah. Find where they don't have control and push. Yeah. That kind of thing. Totally.
So yeah, that calling out someone specifically is just the MC being true to their principles, which is to like represent the darkness as it enters their day-to-day lives.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it is about that, but with the opportunity to occasionally find some kind of okay.
Yeah, just
So
like when you're playing Darkest Dungeon and occasionally someone goes all virtuous and stuff, like
right.
sometimes really good stuff happens when things are hitting you, but usually not.
Yeah. 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 I feel it. So okay. Cool. Um. Okay. So that cycle that time happens. How I guess how much of that happens before they get to move on, and is that variable? Right. Like
So to me, that balance is really going to be critical because
yes.
that's actually that's a numbers game. That's a
I was gonna say, yeah,
mechanical.
that's a part that you'll need
That's going to
to
take
play
tuning.
test through and continue to tweak, where it'll be like, if on average you gain X bad shit during the bad times phase, and you gain Y good shit during the good shit phase, that will affect the apex of the pyramid, the monster fighting part.
And I can tune that based on how punishing I
Sure.
want the game to be, and I want the game to actually be pretty punishing. This is kind of the funny thing is
Right.
like the mechanisms and like the amount of like damage and stuff that you take and the pressure on you. I put more in the Darkest Dungeon end of the
Mm-hmm.
thing, even though the like flavor of the game is often like La La Fairyland. Everything's
Sure.
actually gonna be really like brutal and like the characters are going to be kind of scraping by. Is the
Right.
hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mean, I'm Madoka vibes, right? Where it's like shit is actually kind of rough, being a magical superhero.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I dig that.
Um, and that it makes it really part of the reward structure of the game, which I haven't explicitly thought about, but basically part of the reward is getting to overcome the like difficult mechanics of the game, and like getting to transform into this really powerful thing and having this like cool expression of your character that you've earned by
Ye-
like suffering and doing this mechanical
Sure.
grind.
Yeah. 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 So I guess like the question becomes, and this is a philosophical thing that you'll sort of work out as you play, but um, are the monsters that you're fighting like? I mean, they're a metaphor, right? Like that's like
This is
that.
one of my principles. One of my principles is about how basically all of the bad stuff in the game is, or at least all the monsters are really about like society's suffocating pressure, and the monsters are the same thing,
Yeah, sure.
and they're all reflections of each
Right, but
other.
you can't fight them as this sort
When
of
it's
pushed
society
down version of
suffocating you,
you.
you can't fight
You
that, right?
can't
You
fight them from the inside. You have
inside.
to be. So I really like that. I like that revelation. I like that feeling of like you can't fight the system by just being pummeled by it all the time, and you have to ascend to your like true self. We all have a magical girl within us that we can only achieve by being close and by creating solidarity with the people around us, and then we can literally beat the shit out of the metaphorical version of all of the bad things about society to keep beating us up when we're like going to school. Okay,
Yeah.
I get it. I understand your game now. I feel it.
Welcome to the
Yeah,
game.
I feel
Yeah.
it. I just that was me understanding the design. That was me internalizing what you're trying to do. Cool. Okay. So that's really interesting. So I think the thing here is finding the mechanical element of the game that feels the most um like right for you, the thing that feels like even just the one little thing. It doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be like a move. It's like, oh, this is a thing about pacing. It's a principle. It's a mechanism of economy, and then sort of spiral out from there. Um, I think the trick that at least for me that I ran into is like trying to over design before I'm willing to like actually play it, to like sit down and play that stuff. Um, yeah, there's Eric was mentioning Night
Night
Witches
Witches.
in
Yeah.
the thing. Have you read or played it?
I've heard, I've like, so Hillary played it and I got to get a synopsis from her. And yeah, it's totally in a similar like genre ultimately.
Yeah, I
Where
think it's much less metaphorical. It's much more like two separate games.
yeah,
It's like fight the Nazis, be a lady, and do human stuff.
be a Russian lady.
Yeah, but there is some interesting stuff there. There's some kludginess that I think too like doesn't work, but that's
I mean, that's a good reason to play it too and be
yeah.
like, what doesn't work in this game?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think so. Yeah, so I think that this idea of the three phases, learning the ways they interact with each other conceptually, filling in that kind of blank space that says mechanics, right, between the three of them, um, and then thinking about the hard choices that need to get made in each one, because in my mind most of what makes role playing worth doing is making hard decisions, and
Hmm.
there should be hard decisions to make at every turn of the game, even if like in D&D, even if your hard choice during some part of the game is, do I pick option A or B when I level up? They're both so cool, I don't know, hard
Yeah, that's
choices.
still, yeah,
Yeah,
because that's where the player actually plays the game.
yeah,
They make a decision.
yeah, totally. um So yeah, so in the economy of the game, the phase in which you are performing your societal obligations, like
I really
today's,
like calling it the obligation phase because
yeah,
that's broad enough to allow for multiple different versions of what obligations are,
totally,
but
yeah,
it perfectly sums up what this is really about.
right, yeah. So during the obligations phase, I think too, like I guess, and again, we can talk more about that, but I think yeah, building these phases is going to be central to the flow of your game, and I think it definitely, even if for your first playtest all you have is the interaction between the obligation, the build up, the battery charging, right, the
Mhm.
the balancing between. So if you're being beat up in the obligation phase, if you're being forced to confront society's shittiness about who you are, I think it's important to recognize too, on the flip side, unlike Torchbearer, the camp phase, whatever we end up be calling it, that's a challenge. That's a struggle or a challenge too, right? It's not the like, let's go hang out with our friends and feel calm and collected about everything. It's like, great, now I have to go and be like a socialized human with other people who may have different opinions or values than I do,
And I
but I
have to
want
try to like get something out of
I
it.
want to be friends or be closer to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you? I assume, based just on your explanation of the design, but feel free to like tell me different. I assume that the other phase, the social friendship, whatever we call
Social
it,
link
phase,
phase.
yeah, the social link phase. I assume during that phase, it's player stuff.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the one we want to encourage most, but I'm on the fence on whether or not I want to permit like social linking with NPCs.
Correct. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think
but certainly, I think it's about giving the players control over like framing, right? So,
right now,
so
this is
GM
an
aggressively
interesting
framed in one phase. Now
to
they can
go.
decide what they want to do.
Yeah, to go with the material too. You're going to be looking at group size. You're going to have to talk about number of players because if everybody gets to be friends with one person during the friendship phase and you have 3 players or 5 players, the poor sucker that gets left out, what do I guess they get to get an NPC, they get to go work their hospital job. They get to like hang out with the
Well,
old lady, like
so the one thing there is that like you know, friendship is not monogamous,
mhm,
uh, and it's not symmetrical.
right.
So people in this phase, it's like one everyone gets to have a friend because they get to frame a scene where they hang out with someone,
Yeah.
and the other person doesn't get to decide whether or not they're coming along,
Sure.
because everyone gets to be in the driver's seat at least once on this phase. So yeah, like I want to hang out with Kanji, and then someone else wants to hang out with Kanji, and then like the third player who isn't Kanji or me or that other person, right? Is like, well, no one wanted to hang out with me, so I guess I'll make, you know, you can hang out with me, and he's a
Mhm.
soulless ghost, but whatever.
Sure. Okay. I like the idea that so I guess okay, mechanically, and obviously you don't need to have like fleshed out systems for this, but players during a phase in which they're going to have the opportunity to do so will always, in my mind, as a designer, will always choose the mechanically optimal thing. So if the mechanically optimal thing is to have you got 4 players, each of them have a scene with the other 3 in it every time, so that everybody's power levels all like boost up. They'll do that, right? They'll do the thing that makes the most mechanical
The
sense.
person framing is the only one who benefits,
Mm.
right? Because friendship is asymmetrical.
Okay.
So the other person
So
interacts with them, and yeah,
the
that's
goal
great.
of
But
the goal of the other players in that scene, if it's not your scene, if you didn't frame it, if we're like we're gonna have Kanji takes everybody to the movies scene, and I'm Kanji, what is Yukiko and Chie and Teddy's role in that scene? What is their job as
so their
players?
job is to support, right, and to like lift up Kanji. And
Right.
the player scenes are not necessarily going to be a lot of like, they're not going to be very big.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of them as very short and like you really like there's one roll or not even a roll. There's like one exchange. I mean, there's if there are no dice behind it, people are going to elide it. So I think there needs to be some kind of like move or something. We need to encourage them somehow to like play a scene,
Yeah.
which I think requires that a move happen.
Yeah.
And maybe the move
Absolutely.
is diceless, but the move needs to be like when you say something heartfelt, blah blah blah, like then this stuff happens and that player gets this thing.
Sure.
Um, but they're not also all they're going to be like different options for what you can do. So it's not going to just be like I want to boost. It's just like who do I boost my social link with? In which case you would just be like scene with Kanji, and then on my next turn scene with Kanji, and then on my next turn scene with
Okay.
like just want to have a high rating with one person.
Hmm.
But it will be stuff like you can pursue the investigation or whatever else,
Right.
help people recover. So if someone's taking a bunch of stress, then you can like help them heal. So they're going to be like things that we can do as a party, like all of us as players,
Well,
ways we can try to game the system best.
sure. Yeah. And
And then, we move into another grind. So it's going to be like, we all have to kind of team up and figure out what we all want to do. And it's like, oh, well, Kanji needs to like heal. So someone needs to heal him. Okay, well, that'll be GA. And then these two people are going to,
yeah, like again, like the camp phase, you do some strategizing around who has checks and where to spend them, and to be like, okay, well, the halfling has to go first to do the little dance so that everybody is
well, yeah. And like
right.
different playbooks might have extra cool stuff that they could do. Or maybe there are ways to like get more scenes in that turn, although that seems really powerful and probably something I want to limit.
Right. Okay. So
This phase, to my mind, is the like least intuitive in terms of like traditional playing of story games,
yeah.
and is probably going to require the most designing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think it's okay to leave this part of the Triforce a big question mark. I feel like the monster fighting part is going to be the most straightforward to design.
It's going to be very like classically mechanistic. It'll be like the battle moves in Apocalypse World,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
very like pretty explicitly, it's like, and now the battle moves are happening, and none of these other moves.
Yeah.
And I have that one like pretty well figured out because it's pretty straightforward. Again, there will be the numbers game, which like is connecting all three of these that I need to tune, but I can't do that till I play the game.
So what I would suggest for just like let's just build the obligation phase right now. Like that sounds to me like the most designed already, the most kind of figured out in your head. I've got a pretty good understanding of the game's intended economy, but just design that in and of itself. Think about how that will work loosely, and then try it out a few times. Like just sit down with someone and be like, okay, you're the player, I'm the GM. This happens. These are the stats that you might have. This is a thing you might do. Make up some moves that we'll later throw away and rebuild.
Yeah,
But like,
got all that ready to
yeah,
go.
totally. So just play that. See how it feels at the table. See what kinds of thoughts you have about it, and then look at how you can expand out to those other things. The thing about, again, playtesting this game is you got to really look at it as three separate games that are related to one another, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of like, okay, we're going to play a hand of poker, and the results of that hand of poker, we're going to affect the starting state of this game of Monopoly, and then we're going to play Monopoly, and that's going to kick the shit out of us. And then whatever we've got left from Monopoly, we're going to take that into this game of Street Fighter, and it will affect Street Fighter. And then we play Street Fighter, and then we're done, right? And then we go back into the economy. So you're really designing three smaller games that are designed to influence one another.
Because I couldn't
And
do this easily, you know.
no, God forbid. But it's okay because I think that I think that it's nice because I think that a lot of games are like that without ever telling you or allowing the designers to realize that there's several
They
games.
don't acknowledge the mini game.
Totally, yeah, yeah. Like a lot of games just want to be one thing all the time, but they want to be Apocalypse World when Apocalypse World isn't really one thing all the time.
Apocalypse World is
is
Apocalypse World all the time. Yeah.
yeah, and it's Apocalypse World is a battle game and it's a social interaction game, and they just have permeable barriers between the two. Whereas this game, the barriers will be much more like fade to black and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Burning Wheel is a really strong example of this as well, right? Where they're like, where he's very explicit. Luke is very explicit about like, okay, and here's the mini game for this thing, and I think
Yeah.
it's actually brilliant and great and really helpful to have
Yes.
these like compartmentalized
Well, yeah, and
sections of game.
choosing to compartmentalize like that is, I think, helpful as a designer because you can think about things in a modular sense. Which I do anyway. Like, there's lots of different ways to break a game down when you're designing it, right? The core mechanics, the clusters of mechanics that form characters, the clusters of characters that form scenes, that kind of thing. But being able to break them down design wise, I think is really smart. So your core stuff is this framework of a phase that determines what tools the GM and players have to interact. The result is an entropy of player energy or of character energy. Hopefully your players aren't entropying energy when you play all the time. But the entropy of character energy. So you just have to think about the little bits and pieces that make that up. How does the GM affect the player's energy pool? To what degree? How does that carry into the next thing? And when you're ready to move into that next thing, you'll at least have the trail that came from the obligation phase. You'll be able to say, characters entering into this phase bring with them or lose this thing. So now I know where to start them when we talk about building up this other currency. But again, you might in the process of that, you might find you're designing around how Chie responds to her teacher, and it might give you an inspiration for something somewhere else. And it depends on how you prefer to design, and you'll learn this as you go. You may want to say, cool, obligation phase, just you're on hold for a second. I'm going to go do this other thing because now I'm really inspired by that. Or you might find that really disruptive, in which case, make a note, put it over here somewhere, and stay in the obligation phase until you can get that worked out. For me, we were all over the place with Dungeon World. Like, just we do a move here and then be like, cool, how does that affect monsters? Let's do some monster stuff. And it was filling in Swiss cheese rather than like building from the middle and heading
Yeah,
out.
from like one to the next.
Yeah, so there's no like correct way to design a game in that way. You chase the things that interest you. I think that a lot of people struggle with this when they're making games because they chase the thing that interests them out of a design and into something else, right?
Off into space.
They're like, yeah, but what if space dragons? That's a whole other, and then they abandon, and that's okay. It's okay to like say this game, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm interested in this part of it, so I'm going to go try that. Um, but if you really want to finish a game, I think there is a level of being able to get over that stuff. Being able to say like, okay, I'm excited about this, but like, just hang on. Let's channel that excitement back into the thing that we're working on. Um, so yeah, aim for your first playtest. Aim for like, what can I get in front of another human being in a not just like look at my notes sense, but in a like let's play this. It doesn't have to be the whole game. It doesn't have to be even a significant percentage of the game, but it's a thing. And yeah, and that's where to start, I think. And it sounds like the obligation phase is that place for you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
great. That's really nice to just like have someone else feel like, cool, this is okay. Like,
Yeah, I think. I mean, it sounds like a little bit like you're doing the same thing that a lot of people do, myself included, where you started to design like mechanical bits and pieces, like moves and stats and stuff, which you may not need yet, especially in a game that's about like scenes. So don't let those things calcify in your brain.
mhm.
I tend to, and it makes you feel like a bad designer sometimes, but I tend to, if I don't have time or energy to focus on a specific mechanic, uh, I just put little square brackets and say mechanism, right? Because I'm like, cool, a thing happens,
There
an
will be something
interaction,
here.
yeah, an interaction occurs, but instead of trying to half-ass it or even beginning to think what it might look like, I'm just gonna be like, boom, mechanism, next thing, let's carry on in the thing that I'm building.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can be like, well, wait, okay, we're gonna need to move. Okay, well, we need to roll a stat. Well, what are my core stats? Okay, cool. What other basic moves do I need? How do I attach this to stat? And then eventually you're like fucked
You've
off
built all these
somewhere else.
mechanisms, but you don't have that big picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So just feel free to draw maps and leave blanks, right? Like give yourself some room to be a design explorer. But yeah, like continually absorb both games that are similar. The internet will be great for this. As soon as you start talking about the kind of design or the kind of game you want, the internet will be both great and terrible because they'll
Because
give
they'll
you a
be like,
bunch
well,
of
that already
memes.
exists. Is this thing?
Yeah, they'll tell you that this game has already been made, in which case you can say, I've played it and that's not my game. Or in some rare occasions, they might be like, this game already exists. You might read it and be like, yes, it does. Okay, never mind.
Okay,
New design.
whoops.
Yeah, which is great. Honestly, that for me, as somebody who is like really interested in design but has very little time for it, when somebody tells me like, oh, that role playing game already exists, I'm like, praise Jesus. Like, thank you
Cool. I
so
can just play
much.
it.
I can
Okay.
just play it. I'm done. I'm gonna throw all this crap away, and yeah, and that's that. But the internet will also provide you with stuff that will be interesting or lead you in a different direction, even if it's terrible. Even if you're like, oh, I see why people think this game is like that, but my game, I'm gonna do a different thing. Same with like media, right? Like people will be like, "Oh, this sounds like that cartoon or this TV show or that manga," and you'll be able to absorb new stuff. Because again, for me, it is as a designer, it's about, and I do this as a game designer and also as a GM. When I start getting into like making a new campaign or working on a new design, I just like sink myself into the pop cultural cesspool around that
Yeah.
design. I put on my goggles and I dive in. I watch movies like about the thing or like the thing that I want. I listen to music. I read books. Like I'm just like all of it just
I
around
read
me.
so much about the like history of magical girl anime and what
Yeah, which isn't,
the first ones were.
which isn't to say that you have to be like well read on a thing to have an opinion about it or make a game about it. Like if somebody says to you like, "Oh, have you seen every episode of Revolutionary Girl Utena?" and you're like, "No." And they're like, "Yeah, well, I don't know how you can possibly expect to make a game about magical girls without watching every
Well,
episode of Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant." You can be
the
like,
players are meant to bring that in,
"Yeah,
right? And this is meant to be just generic enough to allow them to bring that and some other things in if they want.
yeah,
So
I dig
that
it.
would be my retort.
I dig it." I mean, I think the metaphor is sound. I think the structure is sound. I think you have some interesting ideas about pacing being something that people need to figure the fuck out, which I think is really cool in a formal way. And yeah, and I think just like work on whatever the minimal amount of thing that you need to play test one third of your game Triforce, and that'll get you headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and then once I have a like rudimentarily functional obligation phase,
Yeah.
tack on
Every
the next thing.
every new thing you make will break everything you made before it every time. Like
Oh, I know all about
yeah.
that.
Don't yes, you do. That's right. Yeah. The characters will never kick the soccer ball the same way twice.
Yeah.
And when you introduce new soccer ball physics, all the players' legs will break off. But that's just yeah, that's just a thing about design, and it'll teach you about going back. And you'll end up in these positions where you're like, well, the new thing I made breaks the old thing. Which thing do I care more about? Which thing do I want to harden, and which thing do I want to blow away and create something new? Cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously you can't design a game in an hour, but I hope I've got you like headed in a
You know, this
direction.
is good because I had like a bunch of notes and a bunch of ideas, and this is just like cool. Yeah, like this, where you were going with this is good, kind of like gently nudging me towards a design. It's
I
perfect.
think yeah, the doom of a finished design is trying to design the whole game before you play it.
Yes.
Play half a game, play a third of a game, play 1/6 of a game. Like don't try to design the whole thing before you actually like sit down with another person, another poor bastard, and say like, I've got this like tiny piece of a game. Would you like to try it with me? One of the best design experiences I think I've ever had was sitting down with Hillary at Go Play 2 years ago and saying, I want to make a Dark Souls game. I want to make a game that feels like Dark Souls. I have some notes. I've wrote some stuff down on cards. Do you want to play that? You want to have a sword fight in my stupid Dark Souls game? And we just did it. We were just like, all right, you have a shield and a knife, and I have a sword, and we're gonna roll around and try to kill each other.
Hmm.
And like it's nuts. Like it's nuts how different it is on the table with another person.
Yeah, because
And
everyone's brain's so different.
one as a fledgling designer too, you want to very quickly expose yourself to other people's feelings and opinions about your design so that you can learn how to be like, yes, yes, I hear you, but no, like understanding when people are saying like, I have this opinion about your game versus like this is feedback about the way the game plays.
I think this was like a day nine ism, but he has this comment about how like players are really good at identifying problems and then just never listen to the solutions they give.
Yeah, the first time I heard that was from it's a Neil Gaiman quote about writing where he's like, yeah, when someone tells you something that they don't like, listen, and when they go on to tell you how to fix it, just fingers in the
Yeah.
ears because it doesn't matter. It's your job to make. It's their job to feel things about it. Cool. Well, all right. I hope that helps at least as initial thing. And for folks watching, I hope you design games. I hope you hack the shit out of games you love. I hope that this as an experiment, this as a conversation has shown you that there are games like Apocalypse World, like Blades in the Dark, that are designed to be broken down and rebuilt as new things. Like obviously Apocalypse World, it's not just a mistake or an accident that there are all these
It
iterations of
was
its system.
made to be a game that would set the conversation about games in general.
Yeah, so that's a thing. So do that, right? Find a game you already love, understand the shit out of it, find another thing you really love, and then mash them together and see what happens. And you'll know whether you can do that or not by understanding the game, and it'll make sense if it makes sense. Um, cool. Well, this has been lovely, Andrew. Thank you for coming on. I'd love to have another, and we'll check in on you in a little while. Let me know after you've done some playtesting, and we'll sit down and talk some more about.
And I wonder where I could find playtesters.
Yeah, I wonder where you could. If anybody's interested in playtesting Andrew's game, you can get a hold of them in several places. But yeah, next week we'll return to answering viewer questions here on Office Hours. I'd like to do more like little specials like this. I've got a few people in mind, and maybe we'll have some folks on to answer the questions with me. But if you want to get involved in Office Hours, you have a burning design or GM question, you can submit it on my website at www.adam-koble.com. There's a little office hours link there. Fill it out, record your question, and I will get to it on air, and we'll walk through it. As always, you can catch all of the previous episodes of Office Hours either by checking out my YouTube, looking at the VODs here on Twitch, or usually just hanging out in my Twitch channel when I'm not live because the playlist is mostly Office Hours. So feel free to do that, and we will see many of you, all of you, I hope, next week for more. Thanks again, Andrew, for coming, for asking a question, being Office Hours' first guest. And cool. All right, that's it. I'm gonna go. I gotta go get ready to GM. See y'all later. Bye,
I have to
everybody.
go to work. God.
Me too. Bye, y'all.